Hello, my name is Joe Griffiths, and welcome to the next webinar in Maryland's Sustainable Growth webinar series. MDP is joined today by our colleagues at the Maryland Department of Emergency Management, Maryland Department of the Environment, and Maryland Department of Natural Resources. Together, we are excited to introduce the newly published Resilient Maryland Strategy. Next slide, Summer. Today's webinar is eligible for 1.5 AICP credits, including one Sustainability and Resilience credit. The CM number is on the screen. You can log your credits on your AICP credit maintenance dashboard on the American Planning Association website. Next slide. First, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we will be sending the slides after to all attendees. Please send all your questions or your questions about the webinar or your tech issues in the chat. But if you have questions for the panelists, we please ask you to use the Q&A function rather than the chat function. You can access this by clicking on More, selecting Chat, and then it'll add it to your toolbar. We ask you to put questions in the Q&A as opposed to the chat, because if you put questions in chat, as other people are chatting, your question is just going to go to the top of the queue and we won't be able to find it. But if you put them in the Q&A, we'll be able to readily access them. Next slide. Resilience is one of Maryland's 8 new sustainable growth planning principles, which Governor Moore signed into law on April 8, 2025. And the intent of the resilience principle is to integrate resiliency measures that will minimize the impacts of rapid and unexpected natural and human-caused threats on communities. And you'll learn a lot more about that in today's webinar. Next slide. Last December, the Sustainable Growth Subcabinet published the Sustainable Growth Implementation Guide, which describes each principle, the benefits of incorporating the principles into local and state planning, key performance indicators the state will use to measure progress, and case examples from around the state of the principles in action. As I mentioned earlier, we will send the slides to attendees following the webinar, and the images on this slide are linked to each resource. Next slide. Now I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Maryland Department of Emergency Management Secretary Russell J. Strickland. Secretary Strickland has led the Maryland Department of Emergency Management, formerly known as the Maryland Emergency Management Agency, or MEMA, since July 2015, and was reappointed Secretary of Emergency Management by Governor Moore in January 2023. Beyond leading the department, Secretary Strickland provides direct advice to the governor during disaster events and leads the coordination of support for local jurisdictions in Maryland. He brings more than 50 years of public service, public safety experience to the role, including time as a senior law and policy analyst at the University of Maryland Center for Health and Homeland Security, the Director of Emergency Services for Harford County, the MEMA Deputy Director, and the Assistant Director of the Field Programs Division at the Maryland Fire and Rescue Institute. Welcome, Secretary Strickland, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm pleased to announce the Resilient Maryland Strategy, which takes a whole-of-government approach to disasters and climate change impacts. We're breaking down silos by creating the state's first whole-of-government roadmap for resilience. We are no longer looking at ecosystems, housing, and infrastructure in isolation. We're looking at them as part of a unified system. This strategy takes an all-hazard approach, addressing everything from saltwater intrusion and extreme heat to cyber disruptions, while accounting for climate change as a threat multiplier. As I often say, mitigation is the center of the universe. This strategy puts that mantra into action. We aren't just planning to respond to the next flood or storm. We're building the capacity to withstand it so that response is less taxing and recovery is faster. What happens next is what matters. Resiliency is a team sport, and it will take more than just the Maryland Department of Emergency Management to put this plan into action. As you'll hear in today's webinar, this plan isn't meant to sit on a shelf. We're already making progress on goals related to the environment and natural systems, food systems, and critical infrastructure. You'll hear more from our state agency partners at the Maryland Department of Planning, the Maryland Department of the Environment, and the Maryland Department of Natural Resources about how they're advancing this work. We're grateful to everyone who participated in this process and to all of you who are here on this webinar. Your engagement will help us make the strategy a success and shape a resilient Maryland where communities will thrive. Thank you.
Great. Well, I'll quickly walk us through the agenda for the rest of this webinar and then pass it back to Joe. I'm Summer Modolfino. I'm the Deputy Chief Resilience Officer for the state of Maryland, and really happy to have all of you here to learn a little bit more about the strategy and all of the work that various agency partners are doing to carry forward the mission. So with that, first, you'll hear a little bit from the Maryland Office of Resilience about the strategy itself. And then we'll jump into a series of updates from the agencies that are really kind of at the forefront of doing some of this work and putting it into practice. So you'll hear first from the Maryland Department of Planning, then the Maryland Department of the Environment, and then finally the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. So with that, I will hand it back to Joe to move us into the next sections here.
Thank you, Summer. Okay, there we go. All right, our next speaker. Mike Hinson has served as Maryland's first Chief Resilience Officer since November 2023. Also charged as an Assistant Secretary of the Maryland Department of Emergency Management, Mike leads a whole-of-government approach to ensure the state can be more resilient to the evolving threats of all hazards. With nearly 2 decades of experience in strategic planning, disaster management, and project management, Hinson is a recognized leader in the field of emergency management. He previously spent more than 10 years with the Howard County Office of Emergency Management, including 3 years as its director. During his tenure, he gained critical hands-on experience in response, recovery, and mitigation efforts following the catastrophic Ellicott City floods of 2016 and 2018, as well as the COVID-19 response. In his current statewide role, Mike focuses on unifying fragmented resilience efforts across various agencies and levels of government, spanning housing, food systems, environment, natural systems, critical infrastructure, and community and local government capacity. He is focused on ensuring that state investments and strategies prioritize frontline communities most vulnerable to the hazards facing Maryland. Mike is a certified climate change professional, certified emergency manager, and certified business continuity practitioner. That's a lot of certifications, Mike. He serves as an adjunct faculty member at the Mid-Atlantic Center for Emergency Management and Public Safety and has previously served as the chairperson of the Baltimore Urban Area Security Initiative and the president of the Maryland Association of Counties Emergency Management Affiliate. Born and raised in Maryland, he remains dedicated to building a safer, more sustainable future for all Marylanders. And welcome, Mike.
Thank you so much, Joe. I really appreciate it. And I just want to start off by thanking all of you who have joined us for this call. I'm just looking at the participant list. I see we're hovering around 750 people. That's just such a fantastic number for us to have on the line today to learn about these resilience efforts, not only for our office and the resilience strategy, which obviously we're happy to introduce to folks, but also to see there's just so many people who are energized and engaged with this topic throughout the state. And quite frankly, it's something that we know very well because we spent the last 2 years in the course of making this strategy dealing with a great number of you who are probably on this call. And we know that there's a lot of energy and excitement behind where we can, well, what we've already done in Maryland and where we can take things as we move forward in Maryland. So with that, we'll go ahead and hop in to learn a little bit more about the office and more about the resilience strategy. So we can go to the next slide. All right. So our office was established through legislation in 2022, funded in 2023, and then we were able to get to the point of being fully staffed in early 2024. We were established for coordinating across state agencies for all hazards resilience funding, projects, programs, just general coordination across all those pieces, as well as to prioritize our communities that are most vulnerable to those hazards. And then you see on the right side here, we have Governor Moore signing the Strengthening Maryland's Resilience Strategy Executive Order that happened in September of 2024. That was a really great second step that really provided some needed administrative pieces to reaching our goals within the office, such as creating the Agency Resilience Liaison Program, which allows for a single point of contact in 22 state departments and 2 state administrations to coordinate resilience activities with our office so that we're able to have that 30,000-foot view of what's going on with resilience within the state. These agencies not only participated in the creation of this strategy, but also will work as liaisons as we move forward to make sure that we're regularly tracking progress and able to know where we stand with this strategy as we move through time. Next slide. All right, well, you can see here on the screen that we have some of the things that we were specifically charged with in that enabling legislation. And so as we look at these things here, there's some things that I already mentioned largely regarding coordination around projects, programs, funding streams, developing best practices and sharing those best practices. I mentioned addressing communities that are most vulnerable to the hazards that are faced in our state, but you see highlighted there is number 2, which is to develop a state resilience strategy. I want to be clear, and I'll get a little bit more into this as we go forward. The state of Maryland is very progressive when it comes to resilience activities. We've had a lot going on for a very long time, but they've been efforts that weren't necessarily unified throughout the entirety of state government. So when we came in, there was just so much already happening. So we had to lay that groundwork and figure that out and then move forward with all of our fantastic partners who've been doing so much work with creating that unifying strategy about how we're going to move forward. And obviously, that's what we're going to dip into quite a bit more today. Next slide. So when it comes to the resilience strategy, the first thing that we really wanted to hit on was creating or establishing a shared picture of hazards and stressors. Hazards are already pretty well documented and known across the state. That's part of the excellent work of the Maryland Department of Emergency Management and their hazard mitigation planning efforts that they take on. And so a lot of that was already pretty well documented, and the data was there. So that was extremely helpful. But we had to look more into stressors as well, right? So stressors, whereas a hazard is a very specific incident that is a pivot point in time that leads to a lot of impacts. You have stressors are things that are happening in everyday life that just make our general lives and systems a little bit more vulnerable to impacts of hazards and/or make recovery from those impacts significantly tougher for those involved. So really delineating some of those stressors a little bit more was something else that we needed to do for the state. Second thing on this list here, which is crosswalking existing plans and programs. When we came to the state, we asked everybody who were partners in this space, hey, could you provide us with your plans that you either directly or tangentially touch on resilience? And I believe we got close to 40 different plans that directly or indirectly had an impact on resilience within the state of Maryland, which just once again goes to show how much was actually happening already throughout the state. But also goes to show that we had a lot of crosswalking to do and understanding common themes, common goals, and where we may have gaps in what we were focusing on across the state in those planning efforts and in those programs. So a lot of effort was put into establishing what that starting point, that baseline really looked like for the state. The next item we're going to get to here is aligning on high-level resilience goals and prioritization criteria. So when it came to goals and recommendations, we really wanted to be specific and we wanted to have an actionable number and a reasonable number of goals and recommendations. And we'll get into those exact numbers in just a little bit. But essentially, we have goals, which are the overarching, objectives of what we're going for. And then we have recommendations, which are the specific actions for how we would get there. And that gets into the next line here. We're talking about proposing and prioritizing those specific state level actions in key sectors in order to meet those goals. The last thing here on the bottom is developing a framework for place-based resilience. So It's really important as we think about resilience across the state that we focus on how are we going to get the best return on investment for dollars that we invest in resilience activities across the state, and where can we move the needle the most? Where are the areas that are most vulnerable, the communities that are most vulnerable, and how can we make sure that we're being equitable in how we address those vulnerabilities, and that we're being inclusive in the way that we're going about addressing those various resilience programs and projects. Next slide. All right, now we get into some more specifics. So as we looked at how to create the resilience strategy, we realized we were going to need to be broad enough in order to be effective and really get the breadth of systems that are involved in resilience throughout the state. But we still needed guardrails because we needed to make sure that we really were able to scope what was in and out for us as we move forward. And so we picked 5 sectors where we thought we could have, after doing that baseline kind of adjudication of what was out there already, what were the 5 sectors where we either needed a lot of coordination or where we had a lot of room where we think we can make some pretty big impacts throughout the state. And the top 5 sectors that came up are listed here on the left-hand side of your screen. Environment and natural systems, that's pretty straightforward. Infrastructure, to be clear, this isn't just like roads and buildings. We're getting into drinking water, wastewater, other transportation systems, communication systems, et cetera. Community and local government capacity. We obviously realize in the state of Maryland, as with most states, there is varying capacity depending on which jurisdiction you're in, whether at the municipal level, the county level, et cetera. And so we realize that there is obviously then going to be gaps in technical abilities and subject matter expertise. And so kind of figuring out how we can improve capacity in those areas. Then moving on to food systems. For those who don't know, the Food Systems Resiliency Council for the state of Maryland resides within our office. So we were very closely linked to food systems resilience already, but there's a ton of work that is happening around food systems already in the state. And we felt that there was a lot that we could do to focus those efforts as well. And we obviously know coming out of COVID a handful of years ago, and then seeing the SNAP program be paused, the funding paused for that earlier, or I should say late last year. We know that there are food system ripple impacts that are significant in the state that we need to make sure that we're doing our best to address. And the last one here is housing. This is huge. We all know that affordable housing is an issue pretty much across the entire country and specifically here in Maryland. But the housing issues get even worse when you talk about them in relation to any kind of disaster event and what our options would be. Additionally, we have to think about our housing from the long-term perspective of kind of what communities are most at risk and how can we really address those issues as we go forward. On the right-hand side of your screen, you're going to see 3 focus areas, and kind of how we integrated these focus areas is as we were dealing with the prioritization of the various goals and recommendations within the sectors on the left-hand side. We use these 3 essentially as like lenses to look at those goals and recommendations and work to prioritize those, thinking about how there were impacts to the economy, to the place-based resilience I spoke about earlier, and justice and equity, making sure that we're being inclusive and understanding of how the projects and programs we're talking about are impacting Maryland communities in different ways. Next slide. All right. So just to give you an idea of kind of the scope of who was involved in this plan and how we went about things a little bit, we had over 120 partners engaged on this plan. And those partners were across the board. Obviously, we had government partners involved, but we also had nonprofit folks. We had the private sector. We had various university entities involved as well, both Maryland public universities and private universities. We made sure that we had all regions within the state represented and represented well in the various sectors so that we could make sure that we weren't having any gaps in the information we were receiving, the expertise we were receiving, and the capabilities we were hearing about. And then we had individual work groups based on those 5 sectors. So we had, once again, all that representation in these 5 sector work groups, so we can make sure we got that regional expertise, the various sector, government, nonprofit, private, universities. You get those various perspectives in each of those work groups. And then once that was all done, as we got into the more of the goals and recommendation stage of the planning effort, we then went to expert interviews. We didn't just want to put in goals and recommendations that were lofty and didn't necessarily have a specific path forward or were vague. And so we took that extra step to make sure that as we got to some goals and recommendations, if we hit any roadblocks, things weren't clear, that we sought out that expert advice and making sure that we understood the situation fully so that we could figure out how we could best address it through those goals and recommendations in an actionable manner. Next slide. All right. And with that, we are introducing the Resilient Maryland Strategy. You'll see the link right here on the slide. Also, I believe we'll be dropping that link in the chat pretty shortly here. So you can go take a look at that. We have the full document available for you to download if you wish. We also, right underneath where the full document's listed, you'll see a couple drop-down menus. So you can drop down and just look at specific sections if there's something in particular you'd like to look at or a certain sector you'd like to look at. You don't have to wait for the whole 260-page document to download. And that is right, you did hear it is 260 pages. But even though it's 260 pages, we did, as I mentioned earlier, keep the goals and recommendations to a limited and actionable number, because we wanted to make sure that we could track and work with our partners on how we're meeting these goals and recommendations as we move forward. So we, like I said, just 20 goals and 50 recommendations. As I mentioned previously, the goals are the high-level things we're trying to achieve across these sectors, and the recommendations are the actions specific to reach those goals that we're recommending. And all of those recommendations have 2, 5, and 10-year timelines. That was in the legislation, and luckily that really worked very well with as we were going through the goals and recommendations. We just realized those are actually really good time markers for us, and we're able to see that obviously at the 2-year mark, we know that those projects are either underway or we have the resources and it's in the plans to get those done in the near term. At 5 years, we're probably like pretty close, but there's something that is holding us up, whether it be a budget issue or a personnel issue, an expertise issue. There could be a number of reasons why we put that into that next tier. And then the 10-year timeline is obviously for things that are a little bit more aspirational and are going to require things of significance, such as new funding mechanisms or coalition building, things of that nature that just require more significant timelines in order to be successful in those undertakings. We also focused on identifying owners and the resources in the interest of making these things as actionable as possible. Once again, as Secretary Strickland mentioned earlier in the call, this is not a plan to sit on the shelf. This is a strategy that all of us are working towards. As I mentioned earlier, we had all these stakeholders involved in telling us about what they were already doing. They were all involved in the creation of these goals and recommendations. So we wanted to make this a document that really helped people guide their work that they were already doing and that they really wanted to aspire to do over the next few years. And so we really did our very best to make sure that things remained clear and actionable for everyone involved as we move forward. We mentioned earlier that we spent a lot of time synthesizing existing efforts, so you'll see a lot of that throughout the course of the strategy. So there's a good amount of those pages that are dedicated to speaking to what has already been done and how those efforts have common themes, how they play into things that we're planning to do as we go forward, how they fit into the sector pictures themselves of those 5 sectors. So there's a lot of really good existing efforts that are already happening across the state. In fact, just too many to name, but I do beg you to go read the Resilient Strategy, and I think you'd be pretty impressed with the things that have already happened across the state of Maryland that you may or may not even know were happening. I think this is probably the best synthesis of the various efforts that are happening across the state that I've seen so far. The next thing here is talking about big ideas or big ideas and open questions. We recognize that there are some things that are not going to fit in a 2, 5, and 10-year timeline. We really wanted to keep the 2, 5, and 10-year timeline on those recommendations so that we could, once again, be accountable to those recommendations. But we also recognize that there are some things that won't fit in there, and we need to still make sure that they are listed so that we can keep coming back to them as we come back and update this plan and as we're checking on metrics, as we're thinking about how we evolve this strategy over time. We want to make sure that those things are there so they're not getting lost as we move forward. Some ideas or some examples of big ideas or open questions would be talking about like the implications of artificial intelligence and what that means, not only for energy issues and critical infrastructure, but also what it means for environment, for government capacity, et cetera. It touches on a number of different areas, but that's a little murky as to how some of those things will play out and what the specific recommendations and goals would be regarding that. Another example would be preparing the workforce for climate change in general. And there's a lot of things that we're doing in that area already, but also there's a lot to be determined based upon various outcomes. Next slide. Okay. All right. So I'm going to talk about the top 5 things to know just very quickly. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, it's a 260-page strategy, so we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of all of it here today. But we just wanted to share some like top-level things here. I've already mentioned the 20 goals and 50 recommended actions, recommendations. And once again, it's a plan of action. We really want to move forward on these things. It's extremely important to us to have things progress and that we're able to report on how we're progressing. And then as we check those things off of our goals and recommendations, we look to how can we keep moving further and further down the list? How can we grow things that were aspirational to being things that are happening? We want to keep this as a constant cycle where we're progressing down the road of resilience for the state of Maryland. With that in mind, I'm going to jump actually from the first one listed here to the one on the bottom right and say that 31 of our 50 actions are things that can happen with existing resources, existing funding, existing personnel. Some of those things are beginning to happen now. Some of those things are happening in the near future. But we wanted to make sure that we got a good balance of things that could happen now and we could move forward and be successful with, but we still wanted to leave room once again for those aspirational things that we need to work harder towards, things that will require long-term complex solutions. We recognize that those things are out there too, and we think we hit a really good balance to keep things heading in the right direction and have good momentum as we move through the future. We also wanted to address a diverse set of hazards. A lot of other state offices that focus on resilience are born out of one specific hazard that they're looking at, often flooding. Sometimes, there's other things that start their office. But for us, it is an all hazards mission. Emergency management as a whole is based on all hazards methodology, and our resilience as we think about the state should also be all hazards in a way that we're making sure to not focus all of our efforts in one area and then leaving us open to negative impacts in other areas as we move forward. So with that, our hazard scope isn't just flooding. It also reaches into other natural hazards such as extreme heat. And then we go into human-caused things, dealing with cybersecurity and items like that. We want to go through a sector-based approach. As I mentioned earlier, this gave us some clearer guardrails so that we can make sure we are doing things in the way that's gives us, pretty clear scope and make sure that we can really be able to monitor and hold accountable for those goals and recommendations without getting too far afield. And as we go through things in the future, we may get really deep into a sector and realize that we've been very successful. And we may try to add in other sectors, and we may realize that we have other gaps that we can bring up into the sector-based approach. And so we think it's a really good way to go about things, keeping things broad, but specific enough that we can actually be accountable and make actions. And then also I want to call out in the strategy, we have 45 success stories from a variety of partners. So we want to make sure that you all also recognize those once again, like not only the actions that are happening, but full out success stories from throughout the state of Maryland that you should definitely be aware of. Once again, I think it's a great cataloging of those things that we didn't really have previously. Next slide. So as I'm wrapping up here real quick, this will be the last slide about the strategy specifically. I'll just say that a few key themes that came out of it are really around state coordination of resilience funding. And we recognize that this is not just our state funds and federal funds. We also need to think about how we can start incorporating philanthropic dollars as well as private sector dollars and investment in order to buy down risk. And make our projects more appealing from an investment perspective. We can be honest that the federal landscape has brought into question about how much we can rely on federal funding as we go forward. And so we really need to think about how we can be smart with how we're positioning our various projects to an investment community so we have long-term success. We need a whole of government approach, which we're already getting into. You heard me kind of talk about that already, how that's really the point of our office and how we were going to, or how we got started and what we're going to continue to do and build. Housing is essential. We didn't have too much time to talk about housing specifically today, but I highly suggest you read that section of the strategy. There's a lot of interesting things there, a lot of things that we can do to move the needle within housing in the state of Maryland. Local jurisdictions are asking for a lot of technical assistance. That's something else that we're going to actively work on addressing through our office and through some of the other departments that you'll hear from today who already have a ton of that technical expertise and amazing programs to help locals, but we can do a better job of probably packaging those things together and making sure that locals are getting connected to the right help at the right time. And the last point I'll make is on extreme heat. We know extreme heat is becoming more and more of an issue, not just for the state of Maryland, but for everyone. But in the state of Maryland, we have some pretty unique circumstances that make it a big problem for us and a growing problem. And we're actively working towards some ways to address that issue in the strategy. And our office specifically will be working towards some of those resolutions. So with that, I will stop talking. I know I've gone over by a couple minutes. I apologize, Joe, but I will stick on the line in case there's any questions at the end of our presentation. Thank you.
Okay, Mike. I know a lot of people here listen to your introduction to the strategy. I see a lot of questions going to the Q&A. That's great. Keep putting them in there. We're going to reserve a lot of questions for the end, but I will ask some of the panelists as we go along to type in their answer within the Q&A. And I see a couple people are already using the chat to enrich learning by sharing some examples and knowledge they have. We also encourage you to do that, to share with your fellow attendees. We're going to switch now to some other agencies to talk about what they're working on to support this strategy. And we're going to start off with my colleagues, Clyde Drayton and Debbie Herr-Cornwell. Clyde is the lead resilience planner for MDP. He oversees the department's community resilience initiatives and best practices development. In this role, Clyde develops MDP's standards and tools for advancing resilience within comprehensive plans and other planning activities. He supports the crafting of resilience data collection and measurement and advances legislative priorities and policy development in support of Maryland's resilience strategy, partnering closely with the Maryland Office of Resilience and other state agencies. Previously, Clyde served as a resilience planner with STV Inc. in New York and as a program associate for social resilience with the New York City Housing Authority. In these roles, Clyde supported the development, implementation, and evaluation of large organizational climate adaptation plans and climate risk assessments for critical infrastructure in vulnerable communities across the East Coast. Following Clyde, you'll hear from Debbie Herr-Cornwell, who is the manager of the Natural Resources and Working Lands Unit at the Maryland Department of Planning. As a licensed landscape architect, Debbie has worked in the private, nonprofit, and government sectors over the past 40 years. Drawing on her experiences working in a multidisciplinary design firm and as a sole practitioner, she designed and constructed environmentally sensitive projects for private and government clients. Prior to coming to MDP in 2017, she worked for 9 years at the county government level, assisting citizens in navigating the development review and approval process, preserving agricultural lands, and developing local policies. Debbie currently serves as as mentioned, as the manager of Natural Resources and Working Lands unit in our Research Review and Policy Division. So I'll turn it over first to Clyde. Welcome, Clyde.
Thank you, Joe. And I've just sent a request to share my slides here.
I approve that. You should be able to now.
There we go.
Great.
So thank you, Joe, for the introduction. And thank you, Mike and Secretary Strickland, for highlighting the Resilient Maryland strategy. That's something that MDP is very proud to support, and a lot of the initiatives that I'll be walking through now highlight how we are aligning with that statewide Resilient Maryland strategy to advance resilience at the local level. At MDP, as Joe mentioned, we do have our sustainable growth policy and planning initiatives. This presentation is really highlighting how local governments may integrate resilience into their active planning activities moving forward. And I'll be kind of breezing through this slide here, but the agenda, of course, we want to highlight some of the recent changes, the enabling legislation for MDP's resilience planning activities. I'll highlight the separation between resilience principles and the resilience element, which again is recently enacted. Next, we'll move on to a draft resilience checklist from a part of our interactions across the state. A lot of our local planners have asked for, in writing, some kind of checklist or guide to really highlight what should they be submitting, what kind of documents should they be developing to be in compliance with the enabling legislation. And finally, we'll hear from Debbie to talk about a lot of our initiatives for preservation and planning for our natural and working lands, which is a huge part of MDP's ongoing initiatives. For resilience at MDP, we really do have three primary buckets. We like to coordinate with our other statewide agencies for their initiatives and programs and lend our land use and zoning expertise to those initiatives. Second is local government support. So we do provide technical assistance when local governments reach out to us to remain in compliance with their planning, comprehensive plan, submitting their comprehensive plans. And of course, if there's any particular issues that they face with land use and zoning and how we may be able to lend our best expertise or connect some dots for them. And lastly is best practices development. MDP has a very robust webinar program here. And a lot of the best practices we do is for engaging local communities and other partners across the state for the best practices in different projects, case studies, which can help advance, again, planning, specifically resilience within planning activities. Briefly, our KPIs, the ways that we are measuring resilience at MDP, our primary goals are to improve human well-being, to mitigate climate change, and grow economic opportunity. So that's our ethos for advancing resilience through MDP. And a lot of our metrics that we receive, our KPIs that we evaluate from local plans, comprehensive plans, and our initiatives are all feeding into those numbers there. Specifically, I'll brief over this one, but for capacity building and planning, we'll be assessing how the number of jurisdictions which are advancing the resilience principle, and you may see this evolve to the resilience element. Secondly, how many jurisdictions are advancing 3 feet additional freeboard, something that is known as a best practice across the state and agreed upon with our state agency partners. And lastly, the amount of funding across counties for resilient energy and critical infrastructure. So how many dollars are the counties attracting and putting to good use for building that local energy resilience? As I mentioned, and as Joe mentioned earlier, MDP has been advancing a lot of legislation to shift the comprehensive and general plan requirements. Last year, we enabled the planning principles, which Joe highlighted. And as of this session, we advanced the resilience elements. So this really further aligns the two initiatives together so that our state and local partners can identify and align how resilience and other planning principles are involved in their comprehensive plans. And a lot of this, as you see for the resilience element, we are requiring our comprehensive plans from our local partners to include or be informed by the state resilience strategy, which we are here discussing today, and of course the Maryland hazard mitigation plan as well. We see the MDP sees these as the overarching documents for resilience across the state, and comprehensive plans which involve the resilience element moving forward should ideally include or reference those documents as well. Specifically, what resilience means here at MDP, attached to the resilience principle and resilience element, is integrating resiliency measures that will minimize the impacts of rapid and unexpected natural and human-caused threats on communities. As you see here, the larger list of our planning principles, but for resilience, this is an agreed upon definition that we've come up with for the resilience principle at MDP, along with our state partners as well. For incorporating that resilience principle, ideally, we've seen a few examples so far, and what you see here on the right-hand side are some excerpts from comprehensive plans, draft comprehensive plans we've reviewed so far. And ideally, it's really putting it out there and saying, for our goals and objectives, here is how we will be advancing mitigation or adaptation initiatives. They'll be addressing stormwater or different extreme weather hazards and threats to the local community, and how the comprehensive plan will support long-range planning to address some of those threats and hazards. And of course, what other kind of partnerships are necessary to advance that implementation. And you see there, the lower right-hand side, Ocean City, and their draft comprehensive plan, they highlight that they'll be directly referencing the hazard mitigation plan from the county. So there are these overarching documents, as we mentioned, which have already provided a foundation for the hazards and threats local planners should be keeping in consideration. And then the resilience principle and resilience element goes a little bit of a step above to say, here is how are we incorporating these larger plans for our local use and what resilience means and looks like for us over the next 10 years or so. Highlighting the resilience checklist, as I mentioned, our state and local partners, they requested additional resources for what they should be including or submitting to us exactly. For the MDP's checklist, we've created a draft to really identify, one, our statutory requirements that have been enabled by the resilience element, and how each element, each statutory requirement inside of the resilience element may be achieved in the comprehensive plans. So we will be utilizing this checklist, this draft checklist, to really get an understanding of, one, how local counties and jurisdictions can meet and become compliance with our resilience element. And of course, so that they can understand the different ways that resilience is connected all throughout their comprehensive plans and connected to our statutes as well. This is just a brief little pullout from the tables of our draft resilience checklist. As you can see, this is highlights our statutory requirements. If the requirement says here, comprehensive plans shall implement the resilience principle, that is referenced through the land use article that's listed there. The resources that MDP would provide or that we would like to see incorporated in the resilience element submitted by our local jurisdictions would be the MDP Sustainable Growth Planning Principles. We've released an implementation guide that our team has worked hard to release. And so implementing and incorporating that and the comprehensive plan is something that would let MDP know that the local jurisdiction is in compliance with the resilience element and utilizing the resources that we've produced explicitly for this. I'm just going to wrap up a few slides here, highlighting a different example of the resilience element requirement. It says here, resilience element shall address mutual assistance needed among state and local partners. Again, as you can see, the land use articles which are listed there and some of the resources that we would provide would identify the local jurisdiction incorporating the state hazard mitigation plan itself, and of course the hazard mitigation plan hub as well, which provides a lot of different additional resources for jurisdictions to use data and strategies which are agreed upon across the state to advance resilience at that local level. I'm going to breeze through this here. I do want to finish off by saying MDP, of course, as I've mentioned, is supporting MDEM's work with the Resilient Maryland strategy. This one I pulled from the Resilient Maryland strategy is one of the recommendations that MDP will be leading over the next 5 years to develop model ordinances that incorporate resilience to support risk-informed development and land use. A lot of these activities will look like MDP compiling that list of resources, so getting an understanding on how resilience is advanced through land use across the state, We want to have interviews and engagements with our state agency partners to understand, is this a tool you use? Can this be expanded upon? And then, of course, identifying those gaps that MDP may be able to lend its best expertise and capacity for developing either a model ordinance or different programs to support that implementation of resilience at the local level. And just 30 seconds here. What can this look like? This is something that, again, is identified in the Resilient Maryland strategy, but this example is from the Metropolitan Area Planning Council from the Northeast, and just highlights some of the different mechanisms that a resilience ordinance may look like across the state. As you see here, there's some resilience ordinance may implement or talk about site plan review. Some may be wetland regulations. Maryland already has a lot of these as one of the most advanced planning states in the country. But this research will really look like, how can we achieve the goal listed in the Resilient Maryland strategy, and what other resources can MDP produce? So following this, I'm just gonna hand it over to Debbie to talk about our saltwater intrusion and different natural and working lands initiatives at MDP as well.
Thank you, Clyde. So I'm just going to wrap up MDP's section by highlighting a few plans and programs that we use in support of resiliency. And starting off with our saltwater intrusion and salinization plan. The General Assembly tasked the Maryland Department of Planning with developing the plan to adapt to saltwater intrusion by the end of 2019, and with updates required every 5 years. We completed the plan in 2019, and our first update was released in 2024. To develop the plan, MDP established and led a state agency team that included the Departments of Natural Resources, Environment, and Agriculture, Maryland Geological Survey, the University of Maryland, Maryland Sea Grant, and the Harry R. Hughes Center for Agroecology. Saltwater intrusion is a technical and complex issue that is steadily worsening due to increased flooding and sea level rise. When researching and developing the initial plan, we learned there's no comprehensive understanding of all the areas currently at risk, and limited knowledge of what areas will be at risk in the future. With the 5-year update, we learned that progress had been made in understanding and forecasting future salinization impacts, but more research, modeling, and monitoring was still being recommended. The plan provides recommendations for state-level actions to better understand the impacts of saltwater intrusion and salinization. It identifies possible adaptation measures based on input from state agency work group, the subject matter experts, and our stakeholders. The plan includes an Appendix A that summarizes and organizes adaptation measures into 3 categories: those recommended for implementation now, those that can be used on an as-needed basis, and those that can be evaluated for use in a Maryland-specific context. Next slide, Clyde. 6 resources were identified as being impacted in Maryland: aquifers, surface waters, agriculture, coastal wetlands and coastal forests, and infrastructure that included roads, wells, septic systems, and utilities. For each of these resources, adaptation strategies were identified to reduce the vulnerability or impact of climate change from saltwater intrusion and salinization on the resources and land types. And a summary of the adaptation policies and strategies is also included. For example, aquifers and surface waters continue to implement existing MDE regulations that limit saltwater contamination of freshwater supplies in coastal areas by ensuring wells do not become a conduit for saltwater. In our agriculture sector, develop a framework that compares federal and state programs that facilitate land use transitions for salt-impacted farmland and provide guidance for establishing and implementing the most appropriate practices. For coastal wetlands, implement land management practices to facilitate wetland migration, including buffers, setbacks, invasive control, and seeding. For coastal forests, establish additional education and assistance for forest owners to address and prepare for salinization, including development of a landowners outreach program. Work with a licensed forester to develop and/or update forest stewardship plans to obtain guidance on the appropriate timing of harvest. And infrastructure, educate property owners on the potential damage caused to their infrastructure due to saltwater intrusion, soil salinization, and sea level rise. The plan also identified unanswered questions and areas where additional research is needed. MDP continues to monitor progress and track ongoing research efforts, and the next plan update will be due in 2029. Next slide, Clyde. Land conservation is another resilience strategy. Protecting our natural areas, our agricultural lands, and forests lowers the risk from flooding, extreme weather, and impacts to our local food systems. MDP partners with our sister agency at the Department of Natural Resources to provide guidance to local jurisdictions in developing their land preservation parks and recreation plans, commonly referred to as the LPPRPs. The local plans are updated every 5 years, and they focus on collecting and evaluating parks, recreation, and land preservation data. The inventory of natural resource conservation land and agricultural preservation land included in the LPPRPs can guide local jurisdictions in identifying and prioritizing lands for conservation. The local jurisdictions are currently updating their LPPRPs, and they'll be due in 2027. In coordination with the Maryland Department of Agriculture, MDP certifies the local agricultural preservation programs. As a certified program with an effective land preservation program, the local jurisdiction keeps 75% of the locally generated agricultural land transfer tax. An uncertified county only retains 33%. These funds are used for local land preservation efforts. One of the criteria for being certified is the local jurisdiction has identified a priority preservation area, which is included in their comprehensive plan. These tools, both the LPPRP and the local Ag Preservation Program certification, can be used by local jurisdictions to support resiliency through land conservation. And with that, we'll wrap up the MDP presentation and turn it back to Joe to introduce our next speaker. Thanks.
Thank you, Debbie and Clyde. I know there's a couple questions about examples in the Q&A that you might be able to address, so please take a look at those. You sparked a lot of interest in your discussion. The summer brings back up the slide. Happy to introduce our next guest. Excellent. So Dr. Rachel Lamb is the Assistant Secretary for Climate Policy and International Affairs at the Maryland Department of the Environment, where she leads the agency's efforts to advance climate action, coordinate cross-agency implementation, and strengthen Maryland's leadership in national and international climate forums. She also works across the department to assess climate vulnerabilities and strengthen actions that raise the standard of protection for Maryland communities. Dr. Lamb brings more than 15 years of experience integrating science and policy to advance climate solutions, including work with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, NASA, and Maryland Sea Grant. Welcome, Dr. Lamb.
Good afternoon. I want to take some time to talk about how our Maryland Department of the Environment is collaborating with our sister agencies to advance climate resilience across the state. So the mission of the Maryland Department of the Environment is to protect and restore the environment for the health and well-being of all Marylanders. That means when we look at the fact that Maryland is facing stronger storms, shifting rainfall patterns, and rising sea levels, we have to make sure that all of our systems of protection are keeping pace with that change. One of the things that we really want to focus on is how we can look across the entire system of our responsibilities and modernize how we plan, how we permit, and how we invest to ensure that long-term resilience. So as you've heard already today, Maryland's resilience strategy is a coordinated multi-agency effort, and we're all looking to advance ways that we can protect vulnerable communities and build that next generation infrastructure that can withstand the storm of the future. I want to talk about 4 ways that Maryland Department of the Environment is focused on making community climate resilient for the long term. The first is surrounding regulatory enhancement. So we want to raise the standard of protection by integrating climate science into our permitting and regulatory decisions. And that means looking across all of the media that we try to protect, thinking about how it applies to our air regulations, our water support services, and our land and remediation services. We also want to think about the role that we play in strategic financing and funding. Already, we direct a considerable amount of funding and incentives to support around water infrastructure across the state. We want to increasingly think about how that next generation infrastructure is built to become more climate ready. A third way that we do this work is by targeting protection. So as a regulatory agency, we also have a responsibility to strengthen our compliance and enforcement across the entire state. But we know that that risk is not the same everywhere. And so we really want to make sure that we are protecting higher risk communities or those that are already overburdened to protect them from environmental harm. We also have an emergency preparedness and response role. We continue to regularly update and exercise emergency response procedures to make sure that we're protecting public health, water infrastructure, critical infrastructure in a way that can better anticipate and respond to those extreme weather threats that we face across the entire state. So while we are thinking about this as a whole agency approach, I want to talk through a couple of examples of what this looks like through our Water and Science Administration program. So one of the things that you'll note that is highlighted in the state's resilience strategy is our comprehensive effort to look across all of our regulations, permits, other kinds of advice materials that we provide, and think about how to systematically include climate resilience. The way that our Water and Science Administration has begun thinking about this is in different stages of review. So you can see here that some of our permits, we are able to review them under our existing authority and existing processes and quickly consider climate considerations for that particular permit. And this is our ability to apply best available science without delaying action. In other cases, we might need to take a stronger or level 2 sort of effort to review. This might be where we think that there's an opportunity to improve, but we need to have focused conversations with stakeholders and think about how we update standards across the board to reflect sort of new cutting edge science. And that often takes a little more time, but can be a little bit more systemic in terms of its impact. And then in other cases, in evaluating our existing regulations, for example, we might see that we need to do a broader scale modernization effort that takes perhaps opportunity for new authorities. And so we need to work with our state legislature to explore what those might be. It might be doing a more systematic overhaul of the way that we are sort of envisioning what the new standard of protection is. And in every single one of these cases, we depend on research partners with universities and others. We depend on strong and proactive community engagement. And we need to be able to be in constant communication with our local government and private sector individuals who we work with on a day-to-day basis to make sure that these guidelines are clear, they reflect that input, and can set us up for success when we think about the next wave of many of these programs. To make this more concrete, I want to give you 4 different real examples of what we are doing today looking across our water system. So you'll see here on the left, one of the things we are doing as part of our Water and Science Administration work is we have a responsibility to maintain our dams. And so we often work directly with private dam owners to make sure that they have the information that they need, including updating the new tools and data systems to give them access to climate-informed design standards. We are working internally to make sure we have a modern asset management system so that as we look especially across our significant and high hazard dams across the state, we can really improve and prioritize our inspections, our compliance tracking, and work with those privately owned dams to prioritize repairs. We're also really interested in improving our understanding about flooding across the state. We were able to leverage a $2.4 million federal grant to really help drive watershed scale flood analyses. As part of that process, we are trying to leverage higher resolution information and data. We are creating a study guide and thinking about pilot projects that could help with local planning and to really understand what unique risks many of our communities are facing to support longer term investments. We also, of course, are thinking about our coastline and parts of Maryland that are facing significant impacts from storm surges and from other sea level rise activities. When we think about our role in protecting shorelines and shoreline erosion, we want to make sure that we're providing the best decision support tools available. And so one of the things we're doing is updating our shoreline erosion control manual, which is that tool that many of our local governments and property owners rely on to help them make those kinds of shoreline investments that protect their properties. And that includes integrating living shorelines or protecting them from increasing intensities of storms. And then a fourth and final example here is thinking about that highest level regulatory updates that we might make is thinking about our MS4 program, which is focused on stormwater. So we need to modernize how we manage that stormwater across our urban and suburban areas. You'll note that we have an active process now with updating those regulations and an extended process of community input, because we know we need to strengthen our restoration requirements. We have to increasingly align those stormwater programs with our commitments to climate resilience and equity. And we need to make sure that it's aligned with a longer term, multi-decadal vision for watershed restoration across the state. These are just 4 examples of the many different projects that we're engaged in, focused, of course, on really critical water infrastructure. But MDE is also evaluating these same kinds of considerations, again, in the way that we think about our climate mitigation goals in terms of tackling greenhouse gases and how many of those solutions actually can also support community-based resilience. And again, as we think about the ways that we are restoring previously abandoned or contaminated areas like our brownfields and making sure that those remediation processes set the state up for success in the context of future climate considerations. If you have any questions, happy to take them here, and would also invite you to contact us via the information here on any of those programs I mentioned or others.
Thank you, Rachel. We'll be taking questions at the end. Lots of questions coming in. And I thank the panelists who are furiously trying to answer as many as they can. And we'll save some at the end. For those we can't answer, I will share them with the panelists, and we can get back to attendees who asked them. So our next panelist is Jackie Specht, who serves as the Resilient Systems Officer with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, Office of the Secretary. In this role, she advises executive leadership on building climate resilience across the state's terrestrial and aquatic systems, coordinates multi-agency partnerships to align climate adaptation efforts, and secures the resources necessary to protect Maryland's natural resources. Prior to working with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, Jackie was a Resilient Coast Program Director with the Nature Conservancy. Her program implemented policy, climate, and social science and community-engaged adaptation to enhance Maryland's coastal resilience. Jackie started her career as a NOAA Coastal Management Fellow with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, leading initiatives to beneficially use dredged material to build coastal resilience. Welcome, Jackie.
Thanks, Joe. Get my screen shared. Hey, everyone, thanks for being here. So I think a theme that we've heard throughout the presentations today is about partnership and how key partnership is to being successful when it comes to moving the needle on Maryland's resilience. And you'll see that theme throughout my slides today, the examples I'm going to share. And I think it really just drives home the need for this state resilience strategy that's really bringing all of these different efforts together. And so my plan today is to give us sort of a whirlwind tour of different areas that DNR is really investing in the climate resilience space. Again, quick overview of a lot of different efforts, but I want to share these as just examples of places that we're plugged in that we would love to continue to build partnerships to advance this resilience goals that we set for the state. So I wanted to first start with just reviewing our agency structure. It reflects our resilience priority, which I think is just so essential for, again, moving the needle on resilience right now. And so I'm fortunate under this current administration, we created the position of Resilient Systems Officer, which is what I sit in, that gives us this sort of landscape scale view across the department of how are we trying to move, how are we trying to invest in climate resilience across department goals. We also did a rebranding and reorganization of the formerly known as Chesapeake and Coastal Services, now Watershed and Climate Services, directed by Natalie Snyder, that has a new group in it that focuses on climate policy, climate projects, climate education. And I'll talk a little bit about that piece later as well. And then I just want to highlight that we also have an internal climate team with representatives across our different units to build this internal understanding of what is it that we're working on across the department? How does that span the different types of resources that we're addressing, and how can we learn from each other? So as I said before, partnerships essential. So I'm going to delve into just a few of the partnerships that we're engaged in and leading, including the Adaptation Resilience Working Group. This is part of the Maryland Commission on Climate Change, chaired by our secretary, and its role is to develop strategies and tools for reducing climate change vulnerability in Maryland. And one of the big things that this group recently developed is the Next Generation Adaptation Plan. So there's a 10-year roadmap developed by multiple partners, so state agencies, local governments, academia, nonprofits, really creating this essentially long to-do list of things that we can be doing as a state to further our climate adaptation. And this built off the adaptation framework that was released in 2019 by the ARWG that initially broke out all of this work into water resources, human health, working lands, natural resources, protecting infrastructure. So defining some of the sector areas that we want to make sure that we're reducing climate vulnerability in. And then again, similar to the state resilience strategy, having these overarching focus areas on JEDI, local government, climate jobs, and training to really get that suite of areas that we can make advancements in climate resilience. We also chair the CoSmart Council, which created a guidance for planning and construction of proposed capital projects to address sea level rise and coastal flood impacts. I find this really useful, not just for capital projects, which is why I wanted to highlight it here. It provides useful tools and guidance for thinking about infrastructure in flood-prone areas and how we can build back, build better. So I think for me, it's a resource that we turn to whether or not something is a capital project. Critical Area Commission, I don't think that's new probably to folks on this call. Been around since 1984. There is 2024 state legislation that passed that resulted in a new internal policy that was just released by the commission to add environmental justice and climate adaptation to project evaluation. And so this is one that I wanted to highlight as we've got good processes, commissions, groups in place, but that we can always be advancing on becoming more resilient as a state. So then I also want to talk about specific financing projects that we're involved in. You'll see sort of a theme across these examples is on sort of state policy, state funding, driving some change, and then also relationships with federal governments and federal funding that is resulting in these changes. So the first one came out of the Whole Watershed Act. So this restoration fund, again, partnership brought together DNR, MDE, MDA to work together to fund these collaborative science-based projects to reduce pollution, create habitat, address climate change, improve equitable access, And this is really seen as a program we've picked 5 watersheds now. The intent is for it to be sort of a 5-year rotating program. So in 5 years, selecting 5 new watersheds to keep this progress going. And I have a former colleague, Christine Kahn, who liked to use the phrase random acts of restoration. And this is an effort that's really driving us towards thoughtful, strategic restoration, addressing issues that might be seen across a watershed. Coming out of the Chesapeake Bay Legacy Act, a section of that was focused on regenerative agricultural practices. So this is one that's actually really exciting for DNR, which might be a little bit unexpected, but we have over 7,000 acres of leased agricultural land. And so we're working now towards rethinking our leases so that we can promote these regenerative practices, so that we can work towards improved water quality, improved climate resilience, and really being a model for what this type of agricultural practices looks like. 5 million trees, again, stemmed from Tree Solutions Now Act, another multi-agency effort. And here, the goal is to get more trees in the ground to make communities greener, healthier, and more climate resilient. And there's an exciting one where we actually already have 1.5 million trees planted with over 86,000 trees in underserved areas. I know that our forestry team is always looking for new places to put trees in the ground. So of course, don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have thoughts about more opportunities there. Land conservation, again, stems from legislation. We've got the Maryland the Beautiful Act that set these targets of 30% land protection by 2030, 40% land protection by 2040. Again, excitingly, we've already achieved that 30% land protection goal. We're working towards the 40% one now. And for me, land protection is just another way of making sure that we're preserving these habitats that can sequester carbon, can buffer communities, provide shade, just really enhance these resilience goals that we're setting. And then there's my last state-oriented one, but the Great Maryland Outdoors Act allocated $5 million for infrastructure projects that mitigate the effects of climate change. We've selected 4 projects statewide, 2 inland, 2 coastal. Again, the intent of these is to really serve as models of what restoration can look like that's being climate smart. So the picture here is an example of one of the project locations down at Point Lookout State Park and addressing regular flooding issues that they're having there. And then we've got some really great relationships with federal agencies, federal funding that's supporting work that we're leading. So we are the fortunate recipients of a multi-agency, multi-state award through the EPA Climate Pollution Reduction Grant. That's giving us $43 million to support climate adaptation, mitigation, and resilience on the Eastern Shore, really by building out nature to store carbon and buffer communities. We also have this relationship. I wanted to highlight this because it's really exciting for us to be able to innovate climate resilience ideas. So we have our coastal zone management program that has this close relationship with NOAA, and it really has been a space for us to test out these new innovative ideas, like supporting the Resilience Authority in Charles County, integrating climate change into state fisheries management. The CZM program helped create the next generation adaptation plan. And it also helped create the Resilience Through Restoration Grant Program, which funds restoration of projects to help protect communities from erosion, flooding, other climate impacts. And then I know I'm running short on time here, so quickly, climate literacy and technical support. This is so essential. I saw someone put in the Q&A, how are we working on empowering kind of localized climate action? And so one initiative that we have actually through the Coastal Zone Management Program is community-based organizations capacity building initiative, or CBO/CBI, that's working to build capacity in these historically under-engaged communities so that they have that kind of local understanding and resources to implement nature-based solutions for climate resilience. We also have a grant program that is to support building understanding and capacity locally for planning for coastal and precipitation flood events. And then we want to build out the science and the technology too. So we've got My Coast Maryland, which is a community science application where anyone from the public can submit photos or information about flooding and storm damage to, again, help us better understand where should we be directing resources and technical support. And we've got a suite of climate change data available on our website as well to support adaptive planning and decision making. And here I'm highlighting a relatively new one, which is the Maryland Coastal Flood Explorer, which really looks at how water is impacting people on the ground. So looking forward, again, excited that we have something like the Resilient strategy that's bringing us together, really setting a direction. DNR has called out in a couple different goals, especially in environment and natural systems. So there's one goal around prioritizing resilience as criteria for conservation and restoration investments. That's something that I'm really interested in and thinking about how do we make sure we're spending money strategically as a state so that we're not losing it in the near future because of climate change. So that's something that we're working across in our grant funding, in our capital projects, in how we're reviewing projects that are submitted on to be done on state lands. And then goal 3, identifying innovative approaches and structures to increase nature-based solutions. So we actually had 2 legislative successes this year. The tremendous Maryland bill had some alterations that enables us to promote community participation in tree planting, stewardship, and maintenance of native trees and shrubs. And then we also had the Supporting Inclusive Climate Adaptation Act, which excitingly enables us to equitably fund through the Shoreline Erosion Loan Program. And also secures, I briefly mentioned Resilience Through Restoration, which is one of our grants, secures that in the state budget so that we will be able to keep funding projects that are protecting communities. And then something that I really valued about the resilience strategy is it outlines these areas that we need to keep moving on as a state. And so we as DNR are really invested in continuing to work through some of these big questions around valuing natural systems, thinking about financing really creatively, supporting communities in the extreme events that they're facing, and then predictive climate modeling, making sure that we have the data and the tools that we need. So again, really whirlwind run through. So I'm happy to chat more, connect people with the right folks if any of this piques your interest. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. Thank you, everybody. I mean, I think the whole webinar has been a whirlwind because there's just so much to cover, so much going on, but still so much to do. And we're not gonna be able to get through all these questions, but I wanted to go over a couple. The very one at the very end, Jackie, there's a couple addressed very specifically to you. You want to look at those and type the answer. To the audience, if you go to the Q&A and look at answered, you'll see we've already answered 32. So you can look at some of the answers that some of your fellow attendees received to their questions. I'd like to ask the panel to turn on their cameras and we'll try to get through a couple questions here before our time ends at 1:30. So thank you. Well, I'll start it off with the question that was first addressed. I see Mike, you answered it, just answered it in by typing in an answer, and Jackie addressed it a little bit. But for anybody else, what do you see as the role of community associations, neighborhood groups, or just the general public in implementing Resilient Maryland strategy from your perspective? Go ahead, Rachel.
Well, shouldn't be a surprise, but in every single one of those process points that I mentioned that MDE has, including how we design regulations, how we come up with guidelines and guidance for local governments, how we think about the kind of financing that local communities would benefit from. We need active community engagement across all parts of that. Public participation at what helps us shape durable policy and make sure that we get it right. So we have very extensive public engagement processes and have designed especially targeted engagement in areas maybe at higher risk for climate impacts, but also those communities that may be considered overburdened or otherwise facing environmental justice concerns. So please keep showing up to those processes. Sometimes it can feel maybe a little bureaucratic, but that is where we can hear directly from all of you and make sure that your ideas, your concerns, the things that you really value are included. So please keep participating in those. And I saw there were some other questions around different elements of our stormwater management and different particular practices that may be incentivized through those regulations. So we have ongoing permitting proposals and regulatory proposals out on the street on those. So please continue to engage with us in that way as well.
Thank you, Rachel. There's a very specific question for you about the timeline on the shoreline erosion control manual. If you want to, it was posted at 1:05. If you want to answer that question.
I don't have a specific time.
Now.
Yeah, no, I don't have a specific timeline for you on that, except I know that work is ongoing and there will be public engagement processes. So we will make sure to, per my last comment, post those so that you can engage with us.
There's a question about the biggest gaps, and those could be the gaps identified either in the Resilient Maryland strategy or that any of the panel have identified through their work. I know a couple of these questions were typed out an answer. I even typed out one answer myself, but any other thoughts about gaps that you've identified?
So I'll be happy to hop in for at least starting this one off. Yeah, I would say we have a capacity gap from jurisdiction to jurisdiction across the state. Obviously, when we're looking at the state level things, it's pretty uniform about our abilities and where we're at as departments. But that's only one level, and that's only part of resilience. Now that we've gotten around the entirety of the state and the things that we have and that we're working on together, we're going to look towards locals and what's available as far as resources, expertise, et cetera, in one jurisdiction to another is significantly different. So I think we need to identify where there are capacity issues across the state and work to target specific technical expertise and assistance to some of those areas to make sure that we're getting the best resilience projects coming up and being filtered up to the state level. That's one gap. I would also say in housing in general, there's a gap that's available to be addressed as well, where we really do have room to make some improvements. And there's already a lot happening in the housing world right now. But there's always an opportunity to think about how we can, really cross over with all the work that we have going on, whether it be work along the shores or whether it's talking about vulnerable communities, extreme heat impacts, et cetera. All those things interplay with housing, and we can probably do a better job of making sure that housing is integrated in our various activities across departments. And that's something we're very actively working towards, and housing has been a partner that is growing and growing more in their activities with us. Stop there.
All right. There are a couple questions about stream restoration projects and some concern about how they're currently engineered or approached, mostly as a focused engineering effort, and then also local opposition to stream restoration projects. Does this strategy or anybody else on the panel consider thinking about, or their agencies thinking about integrating or considering stream restoration from a more resilient perspective? I am not a stream restoration engineer, but I am communicating this from the questions. I don't know if there are any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I was trying to allude to that earlier in my comment, Joseph, but yes, I mean that we've heard those comments, and as part of our update to our stormwater regulations and thinking about a lot of the guidance that comes along with those and some of those processes, we've had very extensive public input, and we are all the way through the last couple of months in our pre-proposal processes, taking a lot of that public input into account as we're designing sort of the final version of what those regulations will look like. So we have been able to integrate a lot of that feedback, or at least take it into account in those public processes, and we'll continue, more engagement with us on that. But part of our role from a regulatory point of view is also to bring in the latest science and engineering guidance to support local governments in actually executing those practices. And so that is definitely an intersection where we're continuing to do more work, in concert with a lot of other agencies.
A couple questions about engaging arborists in this work, either through the development process of a strategy or as part of implementation. Any thoughts about arborists or the arborist community?
Yeah, I can speak to that initially. As far as the strategy, I don't know if like specifically arborists were a group that was engaged. I think we had a lot of uh, environmental expertise in general engaged in this, but I don't know if arborists specifically were. Um, that's specific to the strategy, though. I don't know if Rachel or Jackie have anybody they work with on any of their various programs or plans.
So I don't work directly in the tree planting management space, but again, from my presentation, at least my theme coming into this is that partnership is so essential for moving this work forward. So I'll pass that along to our forestry team, and I know that they feel very much the same way. The more partnership, the better. So great, thank you.
Okay, I saw there was some concern with my audio. I apologize for that. I'll look into that for next time. Let's see. This is an interesting question. As part of the state resilience plan, was there any consideration or thought about integrating it with the state's constitution? I'll admit I don't know how the process for integrating something in the state constitution works.
Yeah, I saw that question and did not. That's a great question. I was like, I don't know how to write this response. That is something where I can honestly say I'm not 100% sure that I have a path forward on integrating it into the Constitution. As far as integrating the Constitution into it, that is something that we could take a look at. I don't know that that was specific in something that we looked at when we were going over the various crosswalking of plans and other resilience related state documents. But yeah, note taken, and we'll take a look. And that's certainly something that we can see if there's a good alignment there or ways that we can map it back to that. That's positive and helpful for moving things forward.
Great. Well, I think I'm going to save the rest of the questions, and we'll be able to share them with the panel, and we'll see if we can generate some other thoughts and share with everybody. We will be sharing the presentation. I'll see if I can share actually the answered questions as well with everybody. But I think we could end it with, we'll go around. If everybody could give, Mike, yours, I know you're not gonna have one simple answer for this, but if everybody could give what they think, like what is one thing, like one of the most important things they can do to help implement this strategy now that it's been released. We'll start with you, Mike. I know you're the Chief Resilience Officer, but see if you can give us one thing.
Sure. My one thing would be to remain engaged. This only works if people are being an active partner in it. And that goes not just state government, that's local governments. And I don't just mean one department. I mean, all departments. We see this as a cross-sectoral situation we're dealing with when it comes to resilience. And whether you're the average citizen who's showing up to a public meeting to give input or answering a survey to give input, or whether you work in one of those governments, whether you're a private entity who does business and is impacted by the various resilience outcomes, everybody's voice does matter, and we do want to hear it, because if we're not being successful for all Marylanders, then I don't think we're truly building a resilient Maryland. And so I'll just stop there. I think I'll talk forever on this, so I'll stop.
No problem. I'm gonna go around the room. Let's see. Clyde, how about you? What's one thing you can do to help implement this?
Sure. I think that, kind of building off of Mike's, but that staying engaged. I was on the Eastern Shore yesterday of Maryland, for local engagement for a rezoning amendment through a local historical town. So, and I think that there were, a lot of folks coming in and out of the engagement and, of course, sharing their history, living in the town for 35, 40, 50 years, talking about what they want for the next 10, 20 as the town continues to grow. I think as you see these comprehensive planning engagements from your county or your local town, I think going and sharing your opinion are things that is very important. Of course, we're here talking about the Resilient Maryland strategy, and I feel as if our agency initiatives are really getting closer and closer and really aligned. If you are compliant with us, then more than likely you'll be in compliance with some of our other agency partners as well. And I think that's very important to make sure that our work is aligned and that your comments are reflected across multiple branches of government as opposed to just it's always siloed in one specific area.
Thank you, Clyde. Rachel?
I would just add that you can see from the breadth of sectors represented in this plan that we have so many people who are passionate across the different areas that they work for many different reasons. It could be because they care about water quality in the Chesapeake Bay, or they care about our climate commitments and, reducing pollution, or they care about just and accessible housing, whatever it might be. I think inviting all of us to ask that question of how do we do that and solve for those benefits and, make us more resilient? How do we make sure that we're designing things from the start that solve for more than one problem at a time? And I think this strategy invites us to think more holistically in that way and gives us more tools to actually begin implementing things where we can find win-wins. And so I know all the agencies you see on this call are trying to hold those things together and do that together, and invite you to help us in thinking in that way.
Thank you, Rachel. Debbie.
I think there's this whole community buy-in, and everyone has said it. It's about being engaged, and it's being a participant. And I think we do all these plans and we create these documents. We have implementation components to part of these documents. And I think if everyone sort of went through the implementation side of things and teased out something that they could address, I think even at the local level, build it from the grounds up. Just pick out something that you can work on for implementation.
Thank you, Debbie. Jackie?
Ditto to everything everyone's saying. Let's stay engaged. Let's keep talking about it. I also, we know that the impacts, the change, they're happening locally. And so I think just more connection that we can build across the state, across local governments to keep identifying these opportunities and working together. That's how we're going to keep pushing resilience forward.
Thank you, Jackie. And I know she's been quiet during this session, but we wouldn't be able to pull this all together without Summer Modolfino, the Deputy Chief Resilience Officer. So thank you so much to Summer for helping coordinate all. There she is. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We'll be following up with you. Please stay in touch with us as well. And we have a webinar next Thursday with Maryland Department of Transportation. If you all follow our webinars closely, we'll have another one coming up soon. Thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.